Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the Retro Wrestling Room. We've got another interview in the podcast series today. We've got a very special guest who, and this may seem crazy, the first actual Welsh guest we've had on the channel. We've been to Japan, we've been to Singapore, we've been to the US, Ireland, we've been everywhere, but we haven't seemed to be in Wales before, which is a bit of a weird one. It is the former NXT Tag Team Champion, NXT UK Tag Team Champion, I apologise, TNA Tag Team Champion, Rev Pro Tag Team Champion, owner of New Wave down in Cardiff. He is the current Riot Caribbean Champion. We have White Lightning, Mark Andrews on the channel. How's it going, man?
How we doing, man? Yeah, good, thanks. I can't believe I'm your first Welshman.
I know, it's really weird. I don't know how that's happened.
Although, what an honour, you know, what an honour to be your first Welshman here.
There we go. Yeah,
thanks for having me on.
We've had people from the US, like I said, Singapore. We've been to Japan with Balianaki. We've had loads of different people on, but yeah, we just haven't got anybody from Wales just yet.
Well, I'm glad to be the first one anyway. Hopefully the first of many.
Yes, I hope so. First off, because it's obviously in the news at the moment, we are less than 24 hours out from WrestleMania. Did you manage to watch any of the show this year?
Yes. Night one, I stayed up until I think it was about 2:30. I just finished my show down in Cardiff City Centre with Attack Pro Wrestling. So I had a beer and a pizza with my good friend Andy Roberts. And we managed to get up to the Phoenix and Chad Gable match. Really enjoyed everything I saw. And then the next day I caught the main event. And then this morning I watched most but not all of night two. So I'd say I'm pretty well kept up. I've missed a few matches here or there, but for the most part I've seen most of it.
I think the big news for people here in the UK is that Joe Hendry got onto the card out of nowhere.
I had a message from Flash Morgan Webster this morning. So I got a group chat with Flash, Eddie Dennis, and the Wild Boar, Mike Hitchman. And we were all speculating yesterday, it's got to be, Tommy End or maybe Rusev or like some big pop like that. And then he messaged again this morning and said, lads, do not read any spoilers. You got to watch it. And as soon as I heard the music, I was like, you cheeky boy, Joe Hendry. Honestly, I love it. That man has got insane hustle. To see his career, like the way it's gone over the last 2 years is unreal. Because obviously 2 years ago, around now, we were kind of going back to TNA. We won the TNA tag belts, or Impact, sorry, at the time. So we were, seeing Joe quite regularly and seeing him on the indies over here at shows like Bird and Heart Pro Wrestling and stuff like that. To see since then how his career has gone, it's just been unreal, and I love it. I love to see it. Also, can I just say the post match is almost better than the match. Like the hitting the RKO from the pose and then having Randy hit him again and do the his version of the Joe Hendry pose. I was just so happy to see it happen. It's amazing. Good on the man.
Wait, you started your wrestling career when I looked at really, really young. I think you were about 14 or something like that when you had your first match, right?
I was 14 when I had my first match. I started training a week before my 13th birthday. Wow. So it's actually 20 years ago, back in January, that I went to my first training session. And it'll be 20 years next November or October since my first match. I'm close to 20 years now.
Wow.
At 33 years old.
Well, funnily enough, we had LJ Cleary on the channel, and he has a very similar story. I was like, how have you been wrestling 10 years? You're like 24 now. How does that make sense?
Yeah, we start young over here, right? And I know same in Ireland, because early on in my career, I met a load of Irish wrestlers really young. Like when I was 14, I went up and trained at Hammerlock in Kent with guys like Zack Sabre Jr. and Johnny Moss and John Ryan. And I met a load of the Irish guys back then. And these guys are like 2 generations before, let's say, like an LJ Cleary. So I'd be name dropping these guys to him, and he'd be like, I'm not entirely sure who they are. But like, friends of friends of friends, guys like Sean Maxa, who were on back then, and Paddy Morrow, and, Phil Hyde, and loads of superb workers from back then. So like the scene in the UK goes back quite far. You know, I mean, when I was training with Zack Sabre, he was 17 and I was 14. And even back then I was like, this guy is a masterclass of pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And you skip ahead 20 years later and you think, oh wow, like some of us are still doing it and like I'm doing pretty well, you know what I mean? Especially guys like Zack. So yeah, it's wild. It's crazy how young you were able to start back then. And I think there's a handful of places these days that do it. I think it's probably a lot safer, and well, I hope it is anyway. A lot of places do like kids classes or teenage classes, which is a much safer way of doing it. Whereas back then it was the Wild West. You know, I was 13 years old and I rocked up to Catay's Community Centre and I learned how to back bump and front bump and chain wrestle, and I just carried on from there.
So like you mentioned now, like in this day and age, like you are part of the whole New Wave Academy. We've got an academy there's 3, right? So there's Midlands, Newport and Cardiff.
Yes, that's it, right? Yeah.
Right, so say somebody come to you that young now, are you able to take them on, or are you like hold back a few years?
So in New Wave Cardiff, the school that I run, we are unable to. We do 16 plus. That is more down to we would love to do teenage classes, and we might look into it soon. It's more down to the space we have. It's a small space. We have a maximum of 10 people. Obviously, when you start training younger people, you have to involve potential parents that want to stick around, which obviously they're more than welcome. But before you know it, it kind of doesn't become very cost effective when you have, let's say, a room full of kids and parents, and then you have to bring in 2 coaches for you know what I mean? It's just not kind of doable currently with our business. However, our good friends in Newport Wrestling in Newport with Brendan White, they do both kids and teenage classes. So if somebody came to me right now and said, hey, I'm 13 years old, I want to start wrestling, I'd say head on down to Newport. It's only 30 minutes away. You know that the standard of training is going to be really high. You know it's going to be professional. So I'd still suggest they do it. Unfortunately, it just can't be with me just yet. When you're 16, you can come back to Cardiff.
Now, luckily enough, or unluckily enough, depending on which way you fall on this, you actually have your first match recorded. And you uploaded it to YouTube at one point, and you did a review of it with a few other wrestlers in live. We're going to take a quick look here at you in action there. We're in pretty amazing attire. Why didn't this attire stick here?
Do you see that guy a minute ago I hugged in the crowd?
Yes.
That's Flash Morgan Webster. So he was actually wrestling earlier that night, but his match didn't go ahead in the end for reasons I might tell you about later. But so he ended up going out in the crowd and watching it. This attire was great. I got this attire on eBay. I loved it. The big, black kind of yellow star on the side. I loved it. Red t-shirt to match. I wasn't quite confident enough to be topless. Although my second match was a few months later in this venue, and I remember like my trainers Ed Ferris and Mike Bird at the time being like, take your top off, and they were like, you've got abs, you can wrestle topless. And I was like, okay, that's the new thing then. So that was a nice little confidence boost. But I love this gear. I only wore it like twice, I think.
What is it like going back to like watch things like this? Obviously you're just so young into your career at that time.
Honestly, it's so nostalgic for me. It's like, especially as I get older, I think it's more special. Like it's I watch like the matches like that and like a lot of my old backyard wrestling that I was doing at a similar time because when you're that young, you weren't really getting many bookings. I think my first 2 or 3 years of wrestling I had like less than 10 matches, and so alongside it I would just do backyard wrestling with my friends, and I look back now and I watch those videos so fondly, and I'm so glad most of it was caught on video, because like I've wrestled for longer in my life than I haven't. You know what I mean? I've wrestled for 20 years, and it was only 13 years before that I didn't wrestle, and I was a fan for like, let's say 4 or 5 years before I started. So it's really nice for me because it's not just a memory from my wrestling career. It's like a memory from a time in my life. You know what I mean? Like weirdly, when I watch videos of like, there's even like old training videos on YouTube because we filmed quite a lot of it back then. And I feel like I can still smell the blue mats of Newport Leisure Centre, and I can still like feel what it's like to be in Burley Academy from the clip you just showed there. So yeah, I'm really like fond on watching back old videos. I'm very sentimental. I think I'll do it for the rest of my life. I don't think there'll ever be a time where I don't watch back like stuff when I was a kid. It's wicked. I love having it on film.
one of the places that was mostly associated with you in the earlier days, especially, but you still wrestle there now, and that is Attack Pro Wrestling. Attack was kind of this UK version of Shikara at the time. This wacky world of you never knew what you were going to get. There were like themed shows and things. How much fun is it, even to this day, to be part of that Attack Pro Wrestling roster?
Ah, mate, I love it, and so like it's funny, right? With Attack back in the day, so it initially started with Pete Dunne and our old ring announcer Jim Lee. So they set up the company, and they're running out of Birmingham. And to be honest, we had 2 weekenders in Birmingham, and like they didn't draw super well. They were loads of fun. It was amazing. But after that, Jim had to go and get a real job, and he kind of stepped away, and I stepped in. So ever since Attack has been in Catay's, these clips are amazing, by the way. Love all these old clips. Ever since Attack has like been in Cardiff, I've kind of been involved, really, And then when I sent to TNA back in the day, I stepped away, and Chris Brooks stepped in. Then when Pete got more busy, Pete stepped away, and it's always been like a company run by wrestlers, passed around to the wrestlers. So we took a slight hiatus over COVID, and then once I was fired from WWE, I was able to have the time I could kind of commit to running Attack again, so I brought it back. So it's Attack I'm so fond on, again, for the same reasons that I talk about the old videos that I watch. Like, it's not just a wrestling company, it's this place where I met so many friends, and me and all my friends ran these shows together, you know what I mean? Even the guys who weren't officially running the shows, like Eddie Dennis or Flash Morgan Webster or the Wild Boar, they were all involved in the creative process, especially on those old shows like the early press start shows and stuff like that. And to be honest, it was the first place in the UK, and I'm going to be biased here, but like I speak to those guys from that group a lot as well. It was the first place. We were the first ones who were kind of trying to emulate that American indie style in the UK. So when you go back to like, when was it? 2011, was it 2012 that we started? I should know, but I think it's 2011. Like, there wasn't a lot in the UK trying to emulate that. You'd have guys like FWA bringing over Ring of Honor, and you'd have like a handful of guys like Chris Travis and Martin Kirby who were like try and emulate that stuff, or like Zach Gibson who would. But really, as a company, British wrestling companies were all trying to be like small versions of WWE, whereas we were like, we want to be PWG, we want to be Shikara, we want to be Ring of Honor, and I personally believe it had a big impact on what then became the boom of British wrestling. I know there's companies like ICW who were smashing it with their own thing, and Progress who really kind of brought on that style as well, but it's almost like I feel like we were the secret little planted seed over here before that style then made it to Progress, you know what I mean? Or made it to like Rev Pro, for example, because even when you go back to those early Progress shows, they kind of got it on the map. The matches that were doing the crazy stuff were like me and Wild Boar, or or Zack Sabre, for example, who again, he was a part of Attack early on. We'd bring him in. He was kind of our mentor and someone who trained a lot of us. So yeah, I do think that although there were lots of people around the UK who like collectively brought that style together and made it what it eventually became, the boom of British wrestling, the first places that kind of committed to it as a genre of the wrestling that they were putting out there, part of the brand, was Attack Pro, and then like Fight Club Pro as well. That's my opinion, but hey, I'm biased, maybe someone else would have a different opinion.
Well, you mentioned the boom period, that early 2010s was mid 2010s. It was a crazy time for UK British wrestling. And you were definitely at the forefront of that. You were in main events in Progress. You become the Progress Tag Champions when they had the crazy shields, everything like that. What was the feeling like in the UK scene at that time for the wrestlers? Did you know you were in like a special scene at that time?
Do you know what? I actually don't think we did realize it, because like I look back now and I think, we're selling at the Electric Ballroom, 800 people every month. And that feels really special, especially now as someone who is, I'm promoting more than before. I'm running a lot more Attack Pro shows now than I was back then. And you think, wow, what an achievement. But I think because it was like long overdue, although the promoters hadn't been the promoters who could competently promote shows. Like, let's compare a Progress to an Attack, right? Attack was like me and Pete and Chris Brooks, all just kids who loved wrestling, doing our best to run these little shows in Catay's Community Centre. And don't get me wrong, we were selling them out, but we didn't know how to actually necessarily promote like a real company would in my research. Like did it on the fly, you know, we learned on the job. Whereas you had guys like John Briley and Jim Smallman who were like from the comedy world, like, you know, they knew how to promote shows in London. So I definitely felt like it was a step up. We were all like, whoa, these shows are so much bigger. But the talent had been around for so long that it also felt overdue, you know, because like there was no problem in finding talent for those shows. You just had to look around the country and go, cool, Rampage Brown, cool, Dave Mastiff, okay, cool, Will Ospreay, he's this young kid from London who's got loads of talent, let's bring him in. This Welsh group, you know, Eddie, Flash, Wild Boar, Marks, but you know, Pete Dunne, let's get in. You know, there was all this talent already there. So they could just be like, pick. Let's put on this superstar show of incredibly talented wrestlers who haven't been like overexposed to the wrestling world yet, you know, because we didn't have the name value of like your Kevin Steens and your Chuck Taylors and your Samoa Joes or whoever else, you know, in the rest of the wrestling world. So it did feel like it was, you know, like a step up. But I think, you know, alongside shows like Progress happening and ICW happening, everyone's individual careers were happening, right? So like TNA British Boot Camp, the first one came around a few years before, you know, and obviously you had guys like Rockstar Spud go over there and end up getting a job at TNA. So because that was happening at the same time, and obviously that then led to British Boot Camp 2, which I ended up winning, it felt just a bit like, oh wow, we've all worked hard and now it's happening. Like Zack Sabre had gone to Noah, you know what I mean? And you know, even around that time then, within a few years, it was like Zach and Walter were PWG champion at separate times. And, you know, I was over there, you know, when Drew and Tommy End and Ospreay and all those, because we were all over there together, and Drew would come back to Scotland. Do you know what I mean? It was this really exciting time, but it kind of just felt normal and natural. Like, oh, we've all worked really hard and it's clicked finally. Whereas I look back now and realize, okay, yeah, we were really in this boom period. But yeah, you know, it's funny, right? I know a lot of fans argue that, like that was the boom period, and then it all got killed by WWE and all this type of stuff. It's so funny because the scene since then is still so much higher than it was when I started. It was almost like we go like this. We go real crap, real good, a little bit of a dip, and now we're just here. You know, and people think that we've dropped down, and I'm like, go back and look at the scene back in 2006 when I started, and we were a hell of a lot lower than we were post NXT UK. You know, so
well, you mentioned like FWA, like they were doing like these big shows, but it was like once every 6 months or something. You know, exactly. that was it.
And they were kind of spot shows, right? Because don't get me wrong, like mad respect to FWA, and you know they bring over big names. I remember those tours when you had like CM Punk and Sandman and all these guys over, but it wasn't like it was necessarily advancing British talent that much. I know they tried. I'm not like, you know, I'm not shitting on them for it. I just mean like they were attempting to, but it wasn't really clicking in the same way that it did with Progress or ICW. You know, where suddenly British wrestlers were draws. So it was very much, it was kind of like American wrestling tours, you know what I mean? It was just big names coming over and showing that there was obviously a demographic in the UK for wrestling, because there always has been. But other than, let's say, Doug Williams, Jody Fleisch, and Johnny Storm, you know, I don't think that many stars were like succeeding from the UK, you know what I mean?
Well, you mentioned those PWG tours. And people always say like the SmackDown 6 at that one time, but it was almost like a British 6, because we had like I can't remember what year it was, but it must have been around that time when it was like you, I think Ospreay, Mark Haskins, Zach, all went to PWG at the same time, and just took over.
So it was 2015 and 2016. Yeah, I remember. The 2015 was me versus Ospreay in the opening round of Battle Los Angeles. I think you had like did Sabre win it that year? Yeah, Sabre must have won it that year. Drew was on it. Tommy M was on it. Mike Skull was on it, and I think that was all the Brits that were on it on that weekend. And it definitely felt like oh shit, like, oh sorry, I say Brits, Tommy being European, but it was like, you know, the Europeans have come over and holy shit, this is like this new scene. And I actually genuinely think that probably helped companies like Progress just as much as you know, their shows did, because suddenly it was like, who are these guys who've come over? You know, we've heard of them from this company called Progress, or we've heard of Zach from Japan, and Drew obviously from WWE, but like suddenly it was like, whoa, okay, the UK scene is absolutely booming. I got to watch the stuff over there. And then the following year, you then had the rest. So you had Mark Haskins, you had Pete Dunne, I think a few more as well, and like it was like, okay, now we're really trying to see all of them. And then, the year after that, NXT UK began, and then it just really kicked off. Like, I think people underestimate how much that first WWE UK tournament like added to the boom, because Progress did their show in Wembley Arena, I think it was 2018, and like WWE UK tournament happened at the start of 2017, and there was this sweet spot right there when, I remember like Pete, for example, he became a megastar overnight because he was already hot on the UK indies and kind of American indies. And then he had all this WWE PR essentially being like, hey, here's this incredible guy. He's on takeovers. He's on NXT every week, but he's still allowed to go and do Progress. He's still allowed to go around the world doing independence. Yeah. And it's like this super cool moment in time where it's like, oh my goodness, you can be a WWE draw, but you can go and do all these indie shows in the meantime. And I think that was a real sweet spot for the boom of British wrestling, like 2018, even going into 2019, before COVID. So yeah, what a wonderful time.
but even now, like that, the UK tournament that you just mentioned, it still almost seems a bit surreal, because looking back, like nothing like that had been done, especially with WWE before, taking just this local scene and just doing something completely different. And I remember even the announcement that they threw out, and there's that big picture where I think everybody's on the stage all in a line, and just seeing everybody there, and like Triple H is there, and you're like, this is special. This is bizarre.
Yeah. It felt special, didn't it? Yeah. I wasn't actually in that photo as well. I think I was in a particularly unique situation because I was signed to TNA up until the very end of 2016. So my contract was literally up until New Year's Eve, and I'd heard about this kind of UK tournament happening because obviously I had good friends, people like Pete, and they'd had tryouts and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God, am I going to miss this? You know what I mean? Am I going to miss the boat because I'm signed? And it was happening at the end of January. And I'd met Regal at Progress show, and he spoke to me afterwards, and he was like, just stay in touch. He's like, I know you're signed elsewhere, but just stay in touch when your contract is finished. Cause obviously we've got Cruiserweight Classic is happening and 205 Live. And there's lots of opportunities for smaller wrestlers at the moment, and I was like, great, cool. And I was just really, really lucky that I think it was 3 days after my contract with TNA ended, I was able to get involved then with WWE UK with the tournament. I had 3 days of being an independent talent essentially, and then I signed with WWE, which is all. And I look back now and I think, wow, and maybe the smart business thing would be to shop around and stuff like that. And hey, maybe I'm a terrible businessman for not doing that. But that was that time in my career where I was actually really a bit of I say a crossroads, but kind of felt like I was at a dead end, if anything, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I think the last few months I'd spent in TNA at the time, or Impact, all the same thing. I really was kind of falling out of love a little bit with wrestling. I was picking up a few injuries, and I was thinking okay, what's next here? And then WWE came around at this time, and it was essentially offering me hey, you're going to do this tournament with Pete Dunne, who, bear in mind, I had Pete's first match when I was 14 and he was 12. And then we got to wrestle each other. What's that? 13 years later, I think, or roughly that, for the WWE in what a lot of people say is match of the weekend. And I remember I was just I cannot pass up this opportunity. Regal had watched our match at PWG a few months beforehand. He'd seen the Battle of Los Angeles match, and I mean, he gave us a bit of a talking to of stop killing each other, but he was impressed, obviously, because then the match then happens at the UK tournament. And I remember just coming backstage from that match and just once, obviously, you shake hands, there was a bit of a stand. I'm pretty sure there might have been a little standing ovation backstage of Triple H and Finlay and guys like that. And I was like, holy shit, how is this happening? Everyone was just buzzing about it. And then I just went off and found a quiet area in the venue and just cried. I just cried my eyes out because I was like, I can't believe it's happened. One, for me to kind of achieve my dream of getting to WWE, which at multiple times in my career I didn't think was going to happen. But two, to be able to have on that first weekend have a match with Pete. He's been my friend since we were kids. Literally, we were talking MSN when it was 12 and 14 years old, and I had his first match in a field in Coventry, and we just wrestled each other in this absolute banging match for the WWE. I love watching back that match as well because there's this one moment after he kicks out of a Hurricane Rana and the crowd just stand up and like a standing O, and I'm just like, I'm still so glad it went well. You know what I mean? You have those nerves of matches not going well, and yeah, I still feel emotional today about that whole time and that whole process.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Pete Dunne there, because I know he is a big part of your career. There was one moment when you and Pete, I don't know if people will remember this, and I'm pretty sure I got the details right. You both kind of caught a bit of flack, and that's because you flew yourselves to America to do indie dates there.
Yeah,
Right?
I love this story.
Yeah, explain to people, for people who may not remember this story.
So yeah, do you know what? Like with the way things turned out, it was so validating, and I'm still so proud of this day of kind of like us sticking to our guns. So there's a lot of like invisible rules in wrestling. We always talk about me and my group always talk about the invisible rule book of wrestling. It's not real. There's no real rules to wrestling. There's ways to do it wrong, but there's a million ways to do it right, and I apply that to like business in wrestling as well. There is an old school mentality, and a very justified one, by the way, for its time, that you shouldn't kind of pay out of your own pocket to get to shows. You shouldn't fly yourself out, pay for your own flight, pay for your own travel to get to shows, because essentially you're making it easier for the promoter to book you and not pay for other talent. Do you know what I mean? You're taking food off their table, if you will. You're taking money out of their pocket. There will still be people in the scene to this day, high ups, veterans. If Undertaker was here right now, he'd probably chew me out for it, or I don't know, like the ultimate vets in the world. I'm not saying, maybe he likes people flying themselves out. I don't know, but there's a justified old school mentality because it would lose people work. Now our argument is, right, this is years later, so no one in the UK at this point, other than a handful of promoters, were making a full-time living from wrestling. Or the ones that were making probably like half decent, well, not great livings from working the camp shows nonstop. We weren't driving ourselves to those camp shows to take money off of those people. You know what I mean? We were flying ourselves to America in the same way that a band would. If you look at any other entertainment industry, if you look at actors, they'll move themselves to LA and they'll base themselves there to get the opportunities. If you look at bands, and obviously I'm very familiar with the band scene and the band world because I'm in one, bands lose money on tours non-stop, even really successful bands, to promote their music, to promote their brand. We always wanted wrestling to be like the band world. Me, Pete Dunne, and Eddie Dennis were pop punk kids. We wanted it to be cool. Wrestling at that time was kind of lame, we thought. We were like, why is every t-shirt got a skull and Comic Sans on it? We'd look at this pop punk scene where you'd see people like crowd surfing and the merchandise was cool and it felt cool. It was awesome, and wrestling didn't feel like that. So alongside us flying ourselves places, there was a whole kind of like mentality that came with it. We set up the Defend Indie Wrestling clothing brand because we wanted wrestling merchandise to be cool. We ripped off of Man Overboard's Defend Pop Punk brand, right? And we got shit for doing that as well. And we wanted Attack Pro to be cool. We wanted the people in the audience not to be like the diehard wrestling fans who are writing 5-star matches and then but we just wanted a cool group of people to be getting excited and yelling and having fun. And I feel like we did that. And another side of this mentality was, hey, let's be like Parkway Drive. Like, we watch the Parkway Drive documentaries, which are like so incredible. And they talk about just flying themselves to Europe and sleeping in the van for 6 weeks straight and playing shows in front of 6 people. And they romanticize this amazing idea of like the hard work ethic, DIY or die. Like you have to do it yourself. You have to give it your all. It's all about the process. It's not about the results. And we just embodied that. Me, Pete, and Eddie did. So we flew ourselves to America for 10 weeks. We had a hotel for 2 nights, and then we made friends along the way to put us up. Guys like Ophidian in Philadelphia, Ricky Shane Page, we'd never met before, but he saw our videos of Attack and he was like, this reminds me of the wrestling I like. This reminds me of backyard wrestling. Come and crash with me for 2 weeks. And we're, very close friends with him now, 10 years later. And I just think to myself, like, sorry, I'm going on a real tangent here, but
no, it's fine.
a load of guys give a shit for it, essentially. You shouldn't fly yourselves out, blah, 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 blah. And I look back now and I'm like, you were so wrong and we were so wrong. Because I've just made, some of the people who I met on that trip have become friends for life. They come to my wedding. I regularly send them photos of my daughter to, you can tell them how my life is doing. People like Ricky. And it was just the best time of our lives. I was just out of uni. I'd saved up enough money. I think I was 21, 22. Pete was 17. Oh, no, sorry. Pete must have been maybe it was 20 and 22 we were, yeah. And we had 10 weeks in America sleeping on floors. We visited 10 states, wrestling for these random little tiny companies. It was incredible. It was one of the best things I've ever done in my entire life, regardless of my wrestling career, just for my actual life experience. It was so amazing. And to think that at one time in my life I was going to be pressured into not doing it because of someone else's opinion. Like, I actually feel like I've learned more from that experience for other areas of my life, of just not to be swayed by people who have a different opinion than you. And do you know what I mean? Like, it was, I feel so much validation now that it went the way it did, that we weren't blacklisted from the wrestling scene and, you know, got kicked out of the locker room, because actually it was the best experience of my life. It was amazing.
Well, there was like, obviously you mentioned Defend Indie Wrestling, which is the clothing brand, but it was way more than just a clothing brand. It was kind of this DIY aesthetic type thing for like the shows, everything. There was also another rumor, and it kind of turned into a program within Progress, and that was the Screw Indie Wrestling. There were a lot of rumors at the time that it was more than just a storyline, and it kind of played off that kind of American trip. Is that true?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's kind of like everyone's just talking about. But I will say I always feel bad talking about it now, because the people in question, so guys like Mark Haskins and Nathan Cruz, who are running it, like, they are lovely guys, and I'm like, they're great people. You know, like I'm a big fan of both of them as wrestlers and as people. You know, me and Mark Haskins, I feel like I'm very close with him and with Vicky and Nathan. Like, we get along like house on fire these days, and I think he's the man. And they've both apologized multiple times since. I think they were both just going through their own stuff. You know what I mean? And so just before I get into it, like, they're great guys. There's no heat anymore. But at the time, I remember it. I think they were, I don't know, I guess there was real life heat because of what the stuff we were doing, like the clothing brand and flying ourselves. And they were almost like, hey, we're going to kind of like show you the way it should be, but also do this like rival brand. And then like, we're going to kind of force it into a storyline. And I remember a kind of awkward meeting that we had. It was, I don't know what progress show it was, what chapter it was, but it was when I won the natural progression tournament, and then I beat Rampage for the belt afterwards. And we kind of sat there in the room, me and Eddie and Nathan and Rampage and Mark and John Briley, and they were pitching this idea of Defend versus Screw Indie Wrestling. And I kind of had to just like stand up as an awkward, well, not stand up, but, you know, speak up as an awkward, like 19, 20-year-old, and be like, hey, we don't really want the clothing brand to be involved in any storylines, because it's actually like a really cool thing we're trying to do here. Like, we don't want to make it this hokey storyline. And I remember when we left the room, like, it went back and forth a little bit, and we were like, hey, no, like, we've never given permission for this. You kind of just did this without asking us. And I remember John Briley at the time kind of like leaning in, being like, you should be proud of yourself for doing that. And it always stuck with me, because I thought, oh, that's really nice. You know, he was a real grown up and I was just a kid who was like trying to make cool merchandise. And he was like, you should be proud of yourself for standing up for yourself there. And I was like, that's really nice to know that that was kind of the right thing. Because, you know, when you go through your wrestling career, especially back then when like it was a bit more of a toxic scene at times, you doubt yourself a lot. You know, you doubt yourself of, am I doing something right? Am I doing something wrong? Am I being disrespectful to the people above me? Am I, you know what I mean? So yeah, as I said, I'm glad it worked out the way it did. Because I'm a people pleaser as well. So I would have been probably heartbroken and had, you know, an anxiety attack if I'd actually pissed someone off properly. So yeah.
We mentioned the UK tournament. That then obviously led into this whole UK brand. What was your time like there? You know, it was like, obviously it was just such a different thing. Like I was saying earlier, nothing had been done like it within WWE before. What was your experience like with the NXT UK brand?
Real quick, I love the fact that the first clip you showed was me nailing a kickflip, because that probably took me like 10 takes. NXT UK, honestly, I think there's two sides to NXT UK. So, well, when I say that, I mean, like, you know, the first year it wasn't even NXT UK, it was WWE UK, you know, and me, Pete, Tyler, Trent, and Wolfgang, we were like we were getting flown out to America for like 4 weeks at a time, 6 weeks at a time, to just be trained at the PC and just to kind of work NXT, like this match just there with Pete. So there was a time even pre NXT UK, which was just us kind of just working for the WWE as British people, and that was really, really fun. my time in NXT UK or WWE UK, whatever you call it, from 2017 all the way up to COVID was fantastic, was wonderful. Like I loved it. It was just, oh my God, like anything could happen. I remember like it felt like the possibilities were endless, because not only would we go and do our our tapings and takeovers and stuff like that, and have these amazing crowds in and get to have these proper like takeover NXT matches, but on top of that, I just get a call on like a Sunday, and it would be like, hey, we need you in LA tomorrow for 205 Live. And I'd be like, okay, shit. Like, I remember one time it happened, and we were about to go on tour with my band. And I was like, guys, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to miss the two for like, I did the first gig. We did a support slot in Cardiff, and then I had to leave for like 3 days and go do 205 Live. We had someone fill in for me, and then I'd fly back. Like, it was so last minute. And although that was, in some way stressful at the time, it was also amazing, because I was like, holy shit, I'm going to be wrestling on TV in LA against Akira Tozawa in 2 nights, and I'm just packing my bag frantically, So it was amazing. I loved it. I loved it so much. And then COVID happened, and obviously the world stopped. And then when we came back from COVID, I felt like we instantly became the bottom of the pecking order. It was like, maybe in some ways that was a good thing, because maybe if Vince McMahon had realized we existed, we would have all got fired sooner. Like, I'm very grateful that we all still got paid throughout COVID. Like, it could have been a hell of a lot worse, 100%. But in terms of, the company, I remember like creatively and feeling a lot less fulfilled afterwards. And I think some of that is just the nature of the beast. I'm sure a lot of wrestlers around the world felt that way. When you're not wrestling in front of a crowd, because we had more time, because we were there training for longer, all the matches were kind of micromanaged a bit more. So it definitely felt a lot less fulfilling. And also pre-COVID, we were still working the indies. So if I didn't feel creatively fulfilled in WWE, I could just go and work Attack Pro Wrestling, and I could just be like, hey, I want to have this match. And it was this incredible time period where we could just kind of not do anything we wanted to, but like, I was flying out to do an indie date in Canada, or going and doing a Progress show in America. And then in between, I'd go and work for WWE, and it was amazing. So yeah, so that's my, even though I have lots of fond memories post-COVID of working for WWE, it was a change in pace massively, and it definitely felt like we were just not a priority at all. We had a lot less kind of FaceTime with the big guys in the company, guys like Triple H, Shawn Michaels, you know what I mean? We were getting less feedback and stuff like that. So overall, a fantastic experience, but definitely the last 2 years, not the same,
Right. I mean, one of the biggest moments of your career within NXT UK was obviously the big show in Cardiff, when you won the NXT Tag Team titles with Flash. What was that moment like for you, and especially being in Cardiff as well?
I mean, greatest moment of my career. The two greatest moments of my career was one, talking about, earlier, me versus Pete in that first UK tournament, because it was just so sentimental. And then this one takes the crown, like it's funny that something that I've never actually talked about on an interview was I was offered maybe 4 or 5 months before Takeover Cardiff, in a very casual way, not an official offer, but I was offered to like move to America and work for 205 Live and be like a permanent member of the 205 Live roster.
Right.
And I was very much like, okay, I'm just gonna like have a think about it. It wasn't an actual offer. I wanted to look over financially how it would work and stuff like that. And before I even kind of had a chance to have that conversation, they announced Takeover Cardiff. Now, Takeover Cardiff wasn't the sole reason why I turned down that offer. A lot of things came into it, but it definitely had a big impact. And when I look back now, like, I don't regret that decision, because I got to have that moment with Flash. And, when you look at the Welsh wrestling scene, like again, I'm biased, but a lot of English people will say the same thing. Wales has the most talent in the country at the moment. Like, it's the strongest scene in terms of in-ring ability. Yet somehow we are this forgotten about country where nobody from Wales is in any of the big leagues. You haven't got a Welsh person in AEW, you haven't got a Welsh person in WWE. Bear in mind, the king of the death matches is Drew Parker, who is like more highly acclaimed in deathmatch wrestling than like 99% of pretty much everyone else. And he's Welsh. And then you've got myself and Flash, who are like the only champions in WWE history who are Welsh, and only guys to win the TNA tag belts, for example. You've got people like Tegan Knox, Eddie Dennis, Wild Boar. We're the only ones that have like recently in the last 10 years been on TV. And So I guess my point is I'm so proud of that moment. I'm so proud that we could put Wales on the map, especially in Cardiff too, just to kind of show the world that, like, hey, there's some really good wrestlers here in Wales, and you're all ignoring it. And for some reason, people still are, and I don't get it. But yeah, that moment, just winning the belts, especially being in there, guys like Alice and GYV, who are all good friends of mine. It was wonderful. It was truly wonderful moment. Like, I'll never forget that. A real highlight of my career and also my life, because it was just, what a perfect, match for me to have, I guess. I was happy with how it went, and it really was. It was an emotional one for me and Flash.
Now, I've heard you speak about this recently. You actually almost performed again in. We still call it the CIA. It's always going to be
Hell
the
yeah.
CIA. You almost performed there again, and that was for AEW when they came over just before their All In show. There was the second All In show, wasn't it? I think.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Say the story behind that, and how close was it to actually happening?
So, I've heard it was pretty close. We got a chat with Tony Khan after the event, and I believe from what he said, we were due to be on one of the shows that they taped that day, and plans got changed last minute, which was a real shame, because again, I look at that room, and there's a lot of extras, a lot of extra wrestlers around, and people who brought in to be, whether it's a security guard or have a little match or whatever it is, and in a room where there was about between 30 and 40 extras, there was 3 Welsh people. There was myself, Flash Morgan Webster, and Elijah. And I'm just thinking, we're in Cardiff. We're in Cardiff. I have a wrestling school 2 minutes down the road that Mercedes Monet has just visited, and she's trained with these great wrestlers like Leon Cage and Tommy Vril and, Vivica and all these amazing Welsh talent. But not only that, there's another school 30 minutes away in New Wave, in Newport, and they have even more trainees. And I'm like, not just trainees, but the scene is so strong. There's so many good wrestlers, and there's 3 Welsh people there. And again, I think that's just, for me, it's I was disheartened that we didn't get on that day, because again, the last time we performed there, we won WWE UK tag belts, for God's sake. That was if not a big, that might not be a big deal to the rest of the world. It was a big deal in Wales.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was a real big deal in Wales, and you got to think about it. Clash of the Castle happened. I had heard rumors leading up to that event that I was going to be on that show, and then there wasn't a Welsh person in sight for that show. There wasn't a Welsh person in sight for the AEW show, and I just keep thinking, I'm like, I get that Americans think that Wales and England are the same thing, but they're not. Drew McIntyre headlining a show in Wales isn't the same thing as it being a Welsh person. So what I was more heartbroken by wasn't that we weren't on, it was that there wasn't any Welsh representation in general. Whack Leon Cage on, give a 17-year-old kid his dream, put on Danny Jones, one of the best young talents in the world right now, put on the Wild Boar, put on Eddie Dennis, put on Brendan White, put on any of these talents. It hasn't got to be me and Flash. Don't get me wrong, we'll take it. I would love to work for AEW at some point, but it just frustrates me that Wales gets overlooked, and I think that I don't know, we've got to do something to fix that, I think. So
right, so a big part of your career now is the whole Subculture team, and this kind of started in WWE, but it's kind of evolved past WWE, and we get to see it now in the UK Indies. We got to see it in TNA in the States. Who was kind of behind the idea of getting the group together, and what's it like bouncing ideas off each other now?
So this is something that we actually pitched ourselves. So me and Flash had spoken to Danny Luna, because we had a big hand in training her. She was training at Dragon Pro Wrestling at the time, which became New Wave Wrestling. So we were all pretty close anyway, and we just figured, we were like, there was no other intergender stables in wrestling, and we were kind of taking a bit of inspiration from teams like Undisputed Era. We had this mindset of if we all have the same entrance music and the same branding, and we all wrestle on a show and we potentially win, fans could hear our entrance music 6 times. You know what I mean? The brand will get over more and more and more. And we pitched it to them. We gave an entire pitch deck to the writers at NXT UK, and it took about 6 months for them to pull the trigger. And when they finally did, though, they kind of made all the the videos and gave us little promos and stuff like that, which was great. But I guess the benefit for us And the reason we've been able now to take it to the indies and keep the branding, you know, in TNA and stuff like that, is that all of the content we made ourselves. So like the entrance video, we filmed on my little GoPro 360. I edited it. I edited the logo. I helped write the music with my bandmate Matt from Junior. So like we owned all the assets. Like, you know, we created it ourselves. So even though, you know, technically we still do, we own the rights to it all. So like WWE couldn't really say anything when we left, and then we were like, hey, we've wrestled in Subculture before WWE as well. So what I feel like we got the reward of all of our ideas once we left WWE, because suddenly we were able to kind of sell merchandise, you know, when they weren't necessarily making it for us. And again, like I said before, we weren't a priority in NXT UK post-COVID. So I'm not like blaming them for it. It's just no one was a priority really. So when we were able to then go to like TNA and still send them that same familiar entrance music and entrance video and stuff like that, we really felt like, okay, now we're kind of in our stride, you know what I mean? We get to take this brand elsewhere, and it felt like we were getting the payoff that we wanted to begin with. But yeah, it's really nice because me, Danny, and Flash are just, you know, close friends in general. Ideas wise, like merchandise wise and stuff like that, we tend to just, it comes pretty naturally, you know. We're all inspired by the music scene, whether it be Flash with the mod culture and the indie music, or me with pop punk, or Danny, to be honest, a mixture of all of it. She's got quite an eclectic taste. So yeah, she, you know, she likes all the music and a bit more punk, let's say, as well. So we all tend to be pretty on board with like merch ideas and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just cool. It's cool to be able to kind of represent more than just yourself when you're wrestling, you know, to actually have like a team behind you, if that makes sense.
One last thing before you go, I've got to ask about the New Wave Academy. What stars can we, or what stars have we got to keep an eye out for over the next couple of years that are kind of coming through, not just yours, but also through Newport and the Midlands as well?
So, like as I said earlier, you know, the Welsh scene is on fire at the moment. There's guys who I think, you know, the local Welsh scene and the UK scene will already know of. Guys like Leon Cage, who is just, he's smashing it at the moment. You know, he's such a young talent. He's very, very special. But on top of that, you know, I know that he kind of takes the center stage here in terms of a lot of people talking about how special he is because he's so young, and he is. But there's guys who I'd argue are as special right next to him as well. Guys like Shane Hook, who he tags with as Rising Tide. Guys like Tommy Vrill as well, you know, James Ellis, another one. And these boys, they all just seem to be from Swansea. They all seem to be from Port Talbot or Swansea. I don't know what's in the water down there, but James Ellis, yeah, again, I think this guy could stand out. And, you know, I've no doubt that at some point in the next few years, he's going to be on our TV screens, whether it's WWE or TNA or you know, AEW. He's just such a standout talent. And then there's guys who've been on the scene for ages, and in my opinion, you know, one of the most criminally underrated wrestlers in the world is Danny Jones. You know, this is a guy who did 2 tours of Japan, you know, almost like 10 years ago now. And ever since he's just bettered himself, he's bigger and better than ever. He's someone I want to see on my TV screen, you know. I feel like, as I said, you know, as soon as people realize that there's this talent pool in Wales, suddenly everyone will get an opportunity. But at the moment, it's just they seem to forget about us. But there's a lot of talent down here. Those are some examples right there. I'm trying to think of some more. I've definitely forgotten some. You know, there's people that everyone know of, like Danny Luna, but like, you know, the sky's the limit with her too. Yeah, Vivica, who's a regular at obviously New Wave Cardiff and New Wave Newport, but also Attack Pro Wrestling now. Yeah, tons of them. I could keep naming, but I'll leave it with just those guys for now.
Everyone will call you out at the next session now. They'll be like,
yeah, exactly.
Why'd you mention them and not me?
Yeah, I mean, a few more. You know, we've got Elijah, we got Harrison Bennett, we got Rain, we got, you know, there's tons of Jay Joshua, Nico Angelo. Like, but you know, the more I think about it, I'm like, hey, you got an entire roster right here. Like, you know, if we can get some Welsh wrestling show commissioned, then that would be the one. That would be what the dream for me.
Mark, thank you so much for coming on today. We didn't get to talk about your podcast. We didn't get to talk about your band. There's so much kind of try and cram in. You know, it's always hard with these things to cram in kind of, like you said, like a near 20-year career into like such a short space of time. You know, it's never easy. But thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, hey, we're just gonna have to do round 2. You know, give it a year, and I'll come back and I'll talk even more. I love to talk. So thanks for having me on.
But yeah,
thanks for having me. Stay
on the line. We'll do a proper goodbye in a moment, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in today with the interview with Mark Andrews there. You can check him out in all the indies around the country. I'll put down all his social media accounts down below so you can follow him there as well. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Leave a comment down below, leave a like, and hit that subscribe button. And as always, guys, peace, look after yourself, and we'll see you soon. Bye, guys.